I'm joined today by my colleague Pam Thompson, who's the manager of adult education at the Arboretum. And I'm going to turn it over to Pam now for a quick hello and to introduce today's speakers.
Okay, thank you, Molly. I'll give you a brief overview of the Arboretum in case some of you have never been here or don't know much about us. The Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University is a 281-acre public park and research collection of woody trees, shrubs, and vines located in Boston, Massachusetts. And the plants that we grow have been collected and propagated from around the world's temperate zone. The plants are grouped by family so that comparisons between species can easily be made. And as with museums that display objects, incredibly detailed records are kept about each plant and how it was propagated, its current condition, and from exactly where in the world it was collected. The Arboretum was founded in 1872 and designed by landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted and the Arboretum's first director, Charles Sprague Sargent. And the landscape is open 365 days of the year from dawn until dusk, and it is free to all. Our speakers today are William Ned Friedman and Rachel Saunders. William Ned Friedman is the 8th director of the Arnold Arboretum in its nearly 150-year history, as well as Arnold Professor of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. A botanist who has devoted his entire career to studying the evolutionary diversification of plants. As director of the Arnold Arboretum, Ned is responsible for stewarding, promoting, and sharing the extraordinary botanical and horticultural resources of the Arnold Arboretum with students, scholars, and visitors. Rachel Saunders is the Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Curator of Asian Art at the Harvard Art Museums, where she's responsible for the Japanese collections. Rachel earned her PhD from Harvard University and is a specialist in medieval, narrative, and sacred painting. She's recently curated the exhibitions Painting Edo, Japanese Art from the Feinberg Collection in 2020, and Prince Shotoku, The Secrets Within in 2019. She was previously a member of the Japanese department of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where she worked extensively with early modern rare books. She's held fellowships at the University of Tokyo and at the National Gallery of Art's Center for Advanced Study and the Visual Arts in Washington, D.C. So welcome to you all, and let's begin with Rachel Saunders.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for that very generous introduction, and welcome to everybody. It's really wonderful to be here with so many people today. I believe we had over 500 people register for this event, which is many times more than we would usually be able to gather in the museum's galleries or around a tree at a tree mob in the Arnold Arboretum. Both sites will be able to visit in the same session today, even though on the ground they lie about 5 or 6 miles apart, which is, I guess, one of those silver linings of the Zoomiverse. It feels especially valuable to me today to be able to come together like this in our continuing state of observing physical distance. But I also want to say that I hope today's program might provide a restorative moment in light of the essential and difficult work in overcoming structural racism that is ahead of all of us. Now, the painting that I'm going to spend a few minutes with today is currently installed in our special exhibition, Painting Edo, Japanese Art from the Feinberg Collection, which is the largest exhibition in our institution's history, which is fitting because it marks one of the largest and most significant promised gifts of art ever made to the university by Harvard alum Robert Feinberg and his wife, Betsy Feinberg. The exhibition opened on February 13th, 2020, and is now temporarily closed, but you can access it through its digital avatars, an online exhibition, an exhibition webpage, a number of virtual tours, and also we have an exhibition catalog which is distributed by Yale University Press, which is available for shipping now. In the galleries, we have over 120 works from Japan's early modern Edo period, which is usually designated 1615 to 1868. Now, while the exhibition does offer a history of Edo painting in 10 rich chapters, our more important aim was to attempt to offer an immersive experience of seeing differently. We have long known that Edo artists were extremely interested in the depiction of the natural world, and in fact, bird and flower painting is one of the three major genres of East Asian painting, the other two being landscape and figures. But what I hadn't quite realized was how significantly my own vision of Edo painting would be altered by the experience of looking at some of these works through the eyes of expert plantsmen like Ned, who's joining us today, and the Arboretum's keeper of living collections, Dr. Michael Dosman, with whom I took a surprising tour of the exhibition just after it opened. And what I'm showing you here is the location of one of the surprises on our tour. This is the last gallery in the exhibition, which is devoted to fan painting. So this is an unusually strong part of the Feinberg collection. And as you can see, I think you can see my pointer, we have fans that are mounted on ribs. So those are folding fans that you would use to cool yourself in the summer months. We also have precious fan paintings that were preserved, removed from their ribs, and mounted as hanging scrolls like this. And over here on this wall, we have fans that were never meant to be mounted on ribs. They were always meant to be flat paintings. And we have arranged them in an analog of a traditional Japanese floating fans composition, which looks something like this. And so we did our own kind of contemporary version of that. And what we've done here is we've combined two sets of seasonal fan paintings. And sets like these are not uncommon. A complete set of 12 months would be painted with a subject appropriate for each month of the year, and they might be mounted for use on these ribs, on folding ribs, or they might, as here, be destined to remain flat so that they could be pasted onto decorative folding screens. This set of 8 fans in very rich colors was painted by the painter Suzuki Kitsu sometime between about 1830 and 1858. Now, usually fans like this would feature a set cast of botanical characters. Poetic tradition in Japan had for more than 700 years associated the combination of the willow and the bush warbler with the first month of the year, for example. And cherry blossoms and pheasants were associated with the second month of the year, wisteria and skylark with the third month, and so on and so on. Now, this kind of poetic screening in turn strongly informed painterly tradition as well, so that to paint a willow and a bush warbler was in effect to conjure the first month of the year and its full range of poetic resonances. And so when it came to cataloging this set of fans, it quickly became clear that this set was governed by a different logic. Some of the plants, such as the pine here at the very beginning of the year, and the irises just below it in the 5th month, these are very conventional seasonal signifiers. But others, like this one at the bottom center here, this, which appears to be a biwa or a loquat, really quite anomalous. And the same is true of this one here, which is the subject of our talk today. So let's take a closer look at that painting. As you can see, there are 2 large open blooms here, and one is sort of horizontally oriented, and the other one is kind of nodding its head downwards a little bit. The stems of the flowers, which I'm just tracing here with my pointer here and here, are artfully crossed so that they extend elegantly across the compositional space of the fan format in a way that almost cries out for this to have been made into a folding fan so that you could fold it and unfold it and fold it back up again. And it kind of creates a sort of kinetic tension even in this flat fan painting. Now the petals, I'm sure Ned will correct me on my use of that term, but I'm going to say petals here, are sort of lobed, as you can see here, and you can see little traces of ink lines beneath this very opaque white pigment that has been used to render the petals themselves, this sort of creamy white opacity that's very distinctive about this plant. And in the center, there's this extraordinary protrusion that sort of looks a bit like a little pine cone or a bamboo shoot, maybe, emerging out of something that looks like a chrysanthemum. And on the pine cone or bamboo shoot part of it, there are these little tiny reddish pinkish marks that kind of look a little bit like hairs to the uninformed eye, I think. The leaves here, we got a close-up of the leaves here, are this wonderful dark malachite green, and they convey a sense of kind of pliability, but also the sort of slight thickness and leathery texture. The leaf veins, as you can see, have been rendered using a lighter green for the central vein, and then these sort of tributary veins are just done in simple ink, black ink. Now, stylistically, this isn't what you might call a scientific or a botanical drawing, as we generally understand that to be, but the essential botanical features of the plant are closely observed, and they're really very clearly conveyed by the painter. Now, in identifying this plant, as we were trying to catalog the fans, we initially got as far as deciding it was a magnolia of some sort, basically from the quality of the petals and mostly from the leaves, in fact. The centers of the flowers, though, seemed very particular and very carefully observed, but they were also very unfamiliar to me. And if it was a magnolia, I would have expected something more like this or this, perhaps. Now, magnolia, or mokuren, or mokurenge in Japanese, which can be translated as mountain lotus, is a member of the classical Japanese poetic vocabulary, but it is not a major player. It's not like a blossoming plum or a cherry blossom or a pine. And that in turn meant that the magnolia did not have a well-rooted place in the painterly vocabulary either. And so it's not commonly encountered. So this painting really kind of remained in my mind as a sort of unresolved anomaly. That is until I saw it with Michael Dosman, the keeper of living collections, who saw it from across the gallery and immediately identified it as Magnolia sieboldii, of which I had not heard. But I did recognize the second part of the name, sieboldii, as coming from the name Philip Franz von Siebold, a man who lived a very interesting life as one of a small number of European physicians who are well known in early modern Japanese history for being stationed in Japan while working for the Dutch East India Company, which was the sole officially sanctioned trading partner operative in Japan at this time. Now, Siebold was a German-born physician. He was an eye specialist. He specialized kind of terrifyingly in cataract surgery. And he arrived in Japan in 1823, charged with finding out as much as he could about the country, its people, and the potential for expanding trading links. Now, as a physician, he had special and unusual privileges. He was given permission to set up a practice in the city of Nagasaki, and his home became a kind of salon cum school for medicine, natural history, and scholarly exchange for the next several years. He was a great collector of both objects and natural specimens, and he published numerous books, including Flora Japonica, which does actually seem to bear a striking resemblance in some ways to the work of one of his Japanese collaborators, Kawahara Keiga. Now, Siebolt's highly productive sojourn in Japan ended what is known with the Siebolt Incident, when he was found in possession of maps, which was absolutely forbidden to foreigners, and he was accused of being a spy. He evaded execution, but he was imprisoned, and then he was expelled from Japan in 1829. He ultimately settled in Leiden, where his collections helped build what are now known as the National Museum of Ethnology, the National Herbarium, and the Museum of Natural History, as well as his own house museum. As the plant experts among you know, numerous plants are named for him, including hostas and hydrangeas. And as I did not know, I discovered in the course of preparing for this event today, also a type of abalone and a mildly venomous sea snake. So the question for me then was still, what prompted this painter, Suzuki Kitsu, to paint a magnolia in this set of seasonal fans? And not just any magnolia, but this very specific, highly distinctive Magnolia sieboldii. And when you're looking at this fan painting in 21st century Cambridge, Massachusetts, you can't help wanting to know, was Suzuki Kitsu aware of Philip Franz von Siebold? Well, given the Siebolt incident and Siebolt's close working relationship with this artist Kawahara Keiga, whose botanical illustrations were certainly in circulation in Japan in the mid-19th century, it does seem feasible. Kitsu certainly had an interest in botanical illustration, and he inflected the works of his illustrious predecessors, such as Ogata Korin, with a more explicit articulation of botanical observation. And he painted not just he didn't just paint types of flowers, he painted species. Siebold himself seems to have encountered this magnolia, which is known in Japan as Oyama renge, in 1827, when it was introduced to him by the Japanese botanist Ito Keisuke, and Siebold subsequently named it Magnolia parviflora. But it was not named from Siebold himself until 1853, which means that Kitsu was painting what he likely knew as Oyama renge, which, while it does grow in Japan, of course, may in fact originate in Korea. So the mystery deepens. Why Kitsu chose this particular flower then is still a bit of an open question, but it turns out that the life of this plant is as unusual and interesting as Siebold's life, and that it is just as spectacular botanically as it is unusual as a painting subject. And I'm going to hand over now to Ned Freeman so that we can experience the plant through his eyes. And we're so fortunate and glad to be able to do this, as not only is Ned the director of the Arnold Arboretum and a wonderful collaborator, he's also, as Molly said, I think in the introduction, a magnolia specialist. So who better to look at this plant with than with Ned? So I'll turn it over to you now, Ned. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ned Friedman. I'm the director of the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, and I'm also a professor of evolutionary biology at Harvard University. And I'm here in the wonderful Arnold Arboretum, which is one of the most magnificent landscapes designed by Frederick Law Olmsted in the 1880s, and part of the incredible collection of museums that Harvard maintains, in this case, a museum of trees. I'm at the base of the oak collection, which is to my right. I'm just going to show you, this is a very old set of oaks with a wonderful cathedral-like sense of space. And just like an art museum where you move from various galleries to other galleries and you have different kinds of art, you could imagine in our museum we're arranged by groups of plants. So there's a very different feeling when you're in the oaks, and then perhaps when you cross over to another collection, such as we're going to do. We're going to go to the hickory collection, and just around the corner is the conifer collection. As you can see right now, the flame azaleas are at their peak. You can see some magnificent patches around us, and if you can get to the Arnold Arboretum soon, I would highly encourage you to do that. We're going to walk into the hickory collection, and you can see above me some towering, wonderful hickory trees that have leafed out just recently. And although this is the hickory collection, it also has a few things like azaleas, and in this case it has some wonderful magnolia trees. And I'm going to just walk towards these magnolia trees because the one that we're going to eventually end up at is the Japanese magnolia that you've just heard about from Rachel Saunders, that's on that wonderful Edo period fan. But in front of us actually is a very wonderful, one of my favorite magnolias. This is the big leaf magnolia from the southeastern United States, and it's aptly named. The leaves are absolutely huge, and I can just show you some of the biggest leaves you'll find of any temperate tree. They can be up to 2.5 feet long. We're just going to scoot by this wonderful, venerable old, probably 100-year-old hawthorn tree that's in full flower, and make sure that I don't get caught by any hawthorns. They have incredibly nice spines that you may or may not be able to see. And we're going to come to the back where we'll find these beautiful, and here's our flame azalea, by the way, just magnificent, isn't it? So if you can get here, as I say, it's worth a walk and into the collections. Well, this is one of our Japanese magnolias. It's a pretty scruffy looking tree. It's a small tree, never gets large. This one doesn't have a lot of flowers on it, but we're going to work our way back to this other Japanese magnolia, Magnolia sieboldii, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story that lies behind what was illustrated and beautifully created in the fan at the Harvard Museums of Art in association with the Edo exhibit that we have been talking about. And I just want to show you, we're going to come up to one of our first flowers. And as you can see here, this may be reminiscent of what you saw in the fan. And now we're going to take a break, and I'm going to set up so that we can actually talk about it.
All right. Can everyone hear me? I hope. We good? All right. Well, I'm back here by this wonderful Magnolia sieboldii. And what I can tell you is the following. This tree actually was collected in China. The species range is both Korea, China and Japan. Many of these temperate species of woody plants actually in Eastern Asia have distributions across those three landscapes and countries. But I love magnolias, and this is one of my favorite magnolias for a couple of reasons. One of them is that biologically, they do something that people don't expect plants to do, and that is to move. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes a time-lapse video that shows you that each magnolia flower on every magnolia tree in the world does a beautiful dance. It actually opens up, it will close, it will open up again, and there's a reason for that biologically. It's actually has to do with how they go through their reproductive cycle. Now, Rachel was talking about the parts of the flower, and she mentioned the petals, and that actually is an older term, and we would call them tepals, but it's the same idea. These are the sterile organs of a flower that sort of advertise to the pollinators, I'm here, come this way. Now, when the flower is in bud, it's all tight, and you have this white little head, and what will happen on a magnolia is, depending on the different species, but in Magnolia sieboldii, when it's ready to open, it will actually be nodding down, as you saw in this wonderful Edo fan, and it will open up, and it will open up just ever so slightly so that there's a little gap right here at the opening into the flower where insects can go in and come out. There's probably some scent that may attract the insects, and then overnight it's actually going to close again, and the next day it will open even more. Now, why is it doing this? Why would it open, close, and open? Well, magnolias are a very ancient lineage of flowers, and you're going to see some of this biology reflected in the wonderful fan painting. And they have a biological phenomenon called protogyny, or they're protogynous. Proto, before, first, gynous, female. And what this means is they have flowers like most flowering plants that are hermaphrodites. They have male parts and they have female parts. And you know there are many plants that don't do that. They have flowers that are only male and flowers that are only female, but most are hermaphrodites. Now, if you can imagine you're a hermaphrodite and you shed your pollen at the same time that you can receive pollen on your female parts, you might expect insects to do something very messy and lead to a lot of self-pollination. And that means not a good outcome genetically because you're selfing. And that means you become inbred. And so plants have created over evolutionary time a huge range of ways in which to play with their gender expression to minimize selfing and actually make sure that they outcross. So how do magnolias do this? Day one, we open up and we're protogynous. That means only the female parts of the flower are receptive and can receive pollen. The male parts are essentially asleep. They're totally buttoned up. They're not shedding pollen. So if an insect comes into the flower, that insect will not be able to pick up any pollen from that flower, but only bring pollen in from another flower. And they close, and on day two, when they open up even more, what happens is that you end up, the female part is no longer receptive. It can't get, even if you brush pollen on it, it's to no avail. But the male parts are now dropping all of their pollen for the bees and other insects to roll around in. And actually, it's not mostly bees, it would be beetles and things like that from magnolias. And they can then distribute that to other flowers that are in their day one. And I'm just going to ask Molly if she can put up a couple of still images that show us a comparison first between the fan and the flower that you're seeing that I took a picture of here at the Arnold Arboretum. And as you can see, I tried to get something as similar as possible. And you can see that this wonderful painting has captured the real essence of the actual species. You can see these beautiful white tepals. And then that strange purplish part, that's all of the male parts. Those are all stamens releasing thousands and thousands of pollen grains. And the yellow sort of head that comes out of there, which on the right looks more like a cone, as Rachel said, with a little bit more of an acuminate tip. Actually, it looks a little greener in the painting, is actually the female parts. But it's very closely observed, and if you ever get a chance to look at a higher resolution image of the painting, you will see little curls that are coming out of that female part, and they are actually the stigmas that are the actual receptive part where pollen has to be deposited. That's how closely studied this flower was. If we go to the next image, and this would be of a day one flower. You can see I'm looking up. They're actually nodding down. It's sort of being very shy, but you can see just through that little tubular opening, you can see a little bit of the yellow, and you see little sort of spikes coming out. Those little spikes are the stigmas that are curled, and in the background, you can see the red. Only at this time is the female receptive, and the male parts are totally closed up. There's no way you can actually access the pollen. And now, Molly, if you'll just go to the day two flower, and this is one of my luckier shots, I will admit. I'm looking up into the sun, and a bee that I asked to come over and pose was very willing to cooperate. And you can see that all of the purple parts have actually flattened back out. And that's actually part of the choreography of this dance. And this insect is going to be interacting only with the pollen parts. The female parts are there, but they've already shut down in terms of receiving. They're now going into reproductive mode. And I think there's one more picture we can show. There you go, of the open flower with the wonderful array, this purple eye, which I think is one of the most magnificent magnolias you can grow. And you can actually grow these in the Northeast. I have one in my own yard here in Boston. I live 2 blocks from the Arnold Arboretum. But I wanted to be actually not in my backyard. I really had to be by these wonderful trees at the Arnold Arboretum. And I don't, do we have one more picture, Molly? Yeah, that just goes back and it shows you the little arrows point to the little hook-like structures, which are actually the stigmas. Now I'm going to try, and I can't guarantee you this will work. And there's another beautiful picture on day one, just with the sun. They're just such beautiful flowers. I'm going to try something, and if it doesn't work, that's just the way it goes, and we'll go right to the questions. But I'm going to take this gimbal I have, and I'm going to try to show you some of the actual flowers. I realize there's no question that they are not going to be as high resolution as you might wish, but I'm going to switch the camera around, and I'm going to see if I can show you a day one flower actually right here on our trees. All right, so I'm coming up, and right now, hopefully, you're going to see a flower. The shade, it's a little bit shady right now because the sun's behind a cloud, but this is a magnificent day one flower. I'll try not to make you nauseated by moving too quickly. I'll see if I can find one that's, here's a bud that hasn't yet opened, just so you can see. So this is waiting for its time in the next couple of days. I'm going to find a flower over here, I think, that has a little bit of sunlight on it. And again, don't worry if it's not too clear, but sort of really nice to be able to be at the actual tree. And it may be a little bit too sunny, but there is that purple eye, and there are the wonderful stigmas and the yellow cone that appear in that wonderful fan. So this is what you have at the tree. There are probably about 15 or 20 flowers that are open, and probably another 30 or 40 in reserve. And had the sun been out, we would have had, I think, a slightly better show, but the clouds have conspired to sort of reduce our ability to see things. But I do want to show you one more flower that's, I think, quite extraordinary. This is a day two flower, and we'll see if I can make anything of it. But there it is. I'm looking straight up to the sky. It's nodding down at me. It's got the stamens all reflexed. All the pollen has been dumped out, and it will begin to develop fruit over the next 3 months until it's ready to shed its reproductive units. So that's what I have for you. And I'm, I think with Rachel, more than happy to take some questions, and I'll set up so that I can actually go back to my little tripod here and not make you seasick. So I will stop there. But it's been a delight to have this partnership with the art museums, and to reflect on what lies in paintings is not only art, but biology. And I would argue, conversely, what lies in these wonderful trees behind us is not just biology, but art.
All right, thank you, Ned. We do have a question about someone has a plant that is 15 years old and it hasn't flowered yet. What hope do they have? How many more years? It
would depend on the plant. Some plants take 40 years for the first time to reproduce. Some reproduce in a year or two. One of the great things about trees is the art of patience.
Perfect answer. I did look, and I think the oldest one that we have is a 1987 accession, perhaps.
Yeah, there's some. These were collected on a very important expedition to China, actually, back in I think the 80s. I don't know that we have any Korean specimens, and we may have some Japanese material, but I'm not sure that we do right now. But as many will know, we are a museum that collects living objects from around the world. And we launch usually 4, 5, or 6 expeditions that collect around the world with our colleagues. And we're often in China. We go to Japan almost every year, throughout the United States and also Europe. So this is just one of our wonderful gifts from the peoples of the world. And these were a Chinese gift in this case.
All right, thank you. Someone was wondering where they could find these in the collection, and I'm just going to give a shout out to our Arboretum Explorer interactive map that you can go to our website under collections, and you can type in the name of a plant, and you can get a map that will show you where the exact location is. In general, these are in the hickory collection. Do you want to say more, Ned, about that?
No, it's a perfect thing. We have a very amazing operation. Every plant here is GPSed using 4 different national satellite systems. So there's 10 decimal points on the other side. And if you use our wonderful web technology, you can pull up a map of every plant and find out where it is. And actually, you can put it on your phone and it'll lead you to the plant.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions for Rachel about the pigments that were used in the background of the fan. That one person called it a purplish background and someone else called it a silver background. Can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. As you might know, often the backgrounds of Japanese paintings, particularly screen paintings, use gold foil or silver foil as a ground, in part because they were very reflective. So in low light settings, if daylight hits those substances, you get this wonderful kind of luminous effect. I was looking too at this fan painting because it was very curious to me. It's a slightly purpley, gray, browny color in the background there, but it does have some signs of having had squares or broken pieces of foil, metallic foil, attached to the painting. And I'm thinking that this is without scientific analysis, of course, but it may well be either silver foil that has oxidized, or it could be that it was painted to appear like silver foil that has oxidized. So that's something that people did too. When you look very closely at the high resolution photos of the fan painting, and if you see the fan painting itself in person, there's actually metallic pigment that's been traced around the stalks and the stems and the leaves to kind of outline them in a way. And I at first thought that maybe this was showing through from the background, but actually I think it's an outlining that's been done with gold pigment, and that really gives this sense of something very special, kind of has an aura, and it's kind of luminous too. It lights them up from the inside. And so although the white which is used, which is probably a shell white, is very non-reflective and very opaque, that sense of that you get from Ned's photographs of the light shining through the tepals, is that the right word, tepal? Mm-hmm. It seems to have been transferred in some way to the plant itself in the fan painting. So although you can't do that with shell white mineral paint, which is a traditional Japanese paint, they did try and bring some light, some luminosity to the plant by using gold and silver, I think.
Oh, how wonderful. And I just realized in my ridiculous excitement about being here with the plant, we haven't shown our time lapse, have we?
Oh.
Shall we do that just as a brief interlude?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that while Pam looks at the next.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. My fault entirely. So this is going to be over about a day and a half. There's that bud I showed you on the plant itself. It just popped open in the morning. In fact, all the female parts. Afterwards, it starts to close in the evening, and we're going to go overnight. So it has female first, but this is wonderful. We're going to wait just a few more seconds, and voila. This is what you were starting to see in that wonderful painting. He wanted the petals reflexed. And you can see all of the stamens there have bended back to create that wonderful thing. In the fan painting, the purple stamens are a little bit more up. So it's earlier in day 2 or later in day 1. And that's just the video. So there you have it. And every magnolia species on the earth does a dance over 2 days with its petals or tepals. Back to the questions.
All right, so many questions. So, has anyone ever looked at the flower under UV light the way an insect would see it? And show
I'm sure the answer is yes. There was a time when every last flower was being investigated to see what insects saw with UV. There's a lot of patterning. I don't know the answer to whether there's any UV patterning on this. Most of the natural pollinators of magnolias will be things that actually eat the pollen, so beetles and weevils and things like that. So the main actual reward for the insects is food. So they may not actually need to sort of have a lot of nectar guides or things like that.
And this, I think you answered this question, but this is truly a 1.5 to 2 day process. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay.
And if you know Magnolia virginiana, just the wonderful, you can stand at a Magnolia virginiana at 4 o'clock to 4:30 in the afternoon. I guarantee you can watch it with your own eyes. You can watch it pop open.
Thanks. What will the fruit or seed look like? Can you describe that? I don't think we have any pictures right now.
We don't, but what will happen is the fruit will probably be about 2 inches long. It'll still nod down, and it will mostly be greenish in this species, though maybe a little bit of blush to it. But there are some magnolias that have fruits that are 4 and 5 inches and magenta, and they're stunners. I always tell people, if you want to see magnolias in the fall, come to the Arboretum and check out the fruits.
Do the flowers cross-pollinate or on the same tree, or do you need multiple trees?
Great question. So I told you that there's a little trick here, which is that you can't move pollen from one flower within that flower to its female parts. But of course, you can crawl out of that flower and walk to another flower on the same plant. And if it's in the right phase, you can end up transferring pollen that's self-pollen. But in general, there are a variety of genetic mechanisms in which plants can discriminate against by testing out whether it's me or not me. But in general, in these magnolias, they just can avoid pollinating within a single flower, but they can't avoid it between flowers on the same plant.
Okay, and these always bloom in June, correct? That's the typical for these.
Yeah, late April, depending on how your spring goes. Into June, we were running a little bit behind with our cold spring, and then all of a sudden we got warm and kaboom.
Not late April, late May, correct?
I'm sorry, late May.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll get my months down soon.
Okay, it's been a confusing time. This is a question for Rachel. What painting medium was used on the fan? Is it gouache?
No, it's not gouache. It's generally traditional Japanese painting pigments are made from minerals, as are many pigments, but usually they're mineral pigments. So the blues and the greens, for example, are ground down from malachite and azurite, and they'll be mixed with some kind of binder. It's often an animal glue binder. Rabbit skin is not uncommon, I believe. And these are the very opaque pigments that you're seeing. So the white, as I said before, I think is a shell white usually. The ink that is used for the veins on the leaves, that's a slightly different kettle of fish. That's usually produced from collecting soot, often pine soot, and then that is in turn again mixed with a binder and dried. And then when you're going to use it, you will grind the solidified ink, which is usually put into either a cake or a stick, and you'll grind it against a stone and add water. And so those are the sort of two main categories of paint or pigment used for this kind of work. And then of course, as I said, you also have these metallic pigments too, which are suspended in a binder or used as foils usually.
Rachel, another question for you. Have you determined how this painting fits into the set? Did you figure out a month that it's associated with in any sort of poetic relationship since you've discovered that it is the Magnolia sieboldii?
Right. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. The set that we have is 8 paintings, which may or may not be a complete set. I have a feeling it might be slightly incomplete and that we might be missing 4 plants somehow over the vicissitudes of time. And looking at it, I think that we probably should assign the Magnolia to the 4th month of the year, which of course doesn't quite line up with our April because it's a lunar calendar. So it's a little bit difficult to line those two things up. And it's also, it depends, as Ned said, on your climate when it actually blooms. So I think it's probably the 4th month. We certainly have the irises, which are very definitely associated with the 5th month in this kind of usual setup of the vocabulary of seasonal painting in Japan. In terms of poetic connections, I was looking for this. It does occur in some early poetry, some classical poetry, where it's actually not called a mokuren, it's called a itabi, which seems to be the old word for what we know as magnolia in Japan. And that's around the 9th or the 10th century, but it's also very clearly thought of as a Chinese flower at that point. It's thought of as an imported flower, which is very interesting. And I'm sure there's a whole history of the importation of plants that would reveal a lot about this. It doesn't really sort of make a great hit in classical poetry, though. It sort of turns up here and there throughout the 14th, 15th century. But what we do see, and if you are interested in this, there's a bit more about this in my essay in the exhibition catalog. What we do see in the Edo period is this change from people performing classical poetic rhetoric and moving into what we in the West call the haiku form, which is these very short poems. And when that happens, there's kind of an enormous explosion in the standardized poetic vocabulary, and you get a lot of different plants and flowers and animals and birds, things being introduced into what was really quite a limited poetic vocabulary for hundreds of years. So the Edo period, you get this kind of great explosion, and people are also similarly, there's a gardening boom going on in Edo. So I think the two things are very closely related, and I think we would probably find the answer to that, whether there's a direct poetic correlation in haiku practice rather than looking back in time to classical poetry.
Do you have thoughts on why, am I muted? No. Do you have thoughts on why the magnolia didn't really catch on?
Well, maybe Ned can help here. How does it do as a cut flower?
Oh, that's a good question. The flower on the tree does not last very long. Probably within 3 or 4 days after opening, the tepals have turned brown. So I'm guessing as flower arrangements go, it was not a winner. But I'm still a little disappointed it didn't make more impact in the poetic sense, because you need the tree in your own yard.
Yeah, well, maybe that's part of it. I mean, again, a question for you, really. Perhaps it's to do with where it lives in Japan. I've read that it tends to sort of prefer slightly mountainous areas and maybe not so much the domestication, but not sure about that.
Yeah, and they're actually, they can be, at least ours are, as I mentioned on the way in, they can be kind of scruffy looking, and you have this magnificent bloom, but I think there are a number of aesthetics that are coming together, and what you have is, and I can't evaluate, is how people are seeing plants, what they're putting value on, if it's the leaves, if it's the form, it could even be the form in winter. If you think of some of the great art around snow scenes, I think of in terms of Japan and Japanese art. So there are some very majestic magnolias in terms of form. This one is not one of them. So, I think it would be a really interesting thing to study up on.
I think so too. I think that there are a number of reasons that Kitsu might have chosen to paint this flower. One is that maybe he had a patron who was particularly interested in natural history or garden cultivation. The other is certainly that Kitsu's teacher, a painter named Sakai Hoitsu, was definitely very interested in this kind of thing. He was involved with a group of people who set up a kind of botanical garden nearby where he lived, and he cultivated his own garden around his painting studio. So perhaps they even were growing them.
Oh, undoubtedly. I did not know that, but that makes me think, and this may speak exactly to why these plants in this set are unusual in terms of a tradition, but they would not be unusual if the point of reference was a botanical collection. And so I think now that that's been revealed, thank you. This is really interesting. We really should return to ask about gardening in that period and what might have been found. again, people can be eclectic collectors. They can, and this is, as I say, this is something in my own backyard that I've been dying to see come into flower. I've waited now 5 years in my backyard from a little juvenile, and this is the first year I've seen flowers. But if it was in a garden, there's something also I would add that I think is potentially important, which is the ephemeral. There's something extraordinary, as I showed in that time lapse. There's a moment in time. You're capturing in that image on the fan, literally either the end of day one, but probably the beginning of day two before the anthers or stamens reflex. It's an actual matter of minutes to an hour. And the flowers themselves are only a matter of days. So I wonder if there's something beyond that that makes it exceptionally special. It was not a cut flower. This is something that you could only capture through art in a moment. And if you didn't have access to a garden or the wild, you could never see it.
Wow. Wow, that is something we would not have seen if we were not in conversation. Thank you, Ned.
You and I are going to get down to work on that botanical garden. I can guarantee that.
Yes,
I'm dying to know more.
It's still there. You can still go. So yeah.
Well, once the travel is back on, you and I are going to Japan.
Yeah.
Call me after the vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have way more questions that we're going to have time to answer today, but we just really want to thank you, Ned, and thank you, Rachel, for taking the time to show us this incredible magnolia. And thank you, Pam, for so expertly facilitating our Q&A. So the Harvard Art Museums is currently closed, and we're not sure about a reopening date yet, but we encourage you to check out our website and keep eyes there to be posted on our future plans. But in the meantime, I just want to echo Rachel's earlier point to check out the Google Arts and Culture virtual tour of the Painting Ito exhibition that's currently available there. And it's the closest thing we can get to looking at Painting Ito without being in the museum.
Yeah, and I'll just thank everyone. Rachel, it's been a delight to explore these fans with you and some of the art in this exhibit. I did go and see the exhibit before it closed, and I cannot wait for the reopening. It is a stunning set of paintings from an extraordinary period. And I'll just tell everyone, if you don't get to see it or you need something more than digital, come to the Arnold this week and see it. We're open every day and dawn to dusk, free to all. And we are delighted to be able to offer our museum objects outdoors. So Rachel, thank you so much. Molly, thank you. Pam, thank you. I think if Rachel and Molly and Pam are game, we're gonna meet back up and do something else this fall between the Ito and the plants in the Arnold Arboretum. So stay tuned.
Awesome, and thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.